Hi, my name's Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Hailey Public Library, and I'm really glad you folks could join us tonight. We are pleased to host science fiction and fantasy writer Evette Davis, who will be reading from and discussing two of her books, The Others and 48 States. Evette is the author of several books, including Dark Horse and the aforementioned 48 States, which was a quarter-finalist in the 2023 Publishers Weekly BookLife Prize. Kirkus Reviews named it one of the best indie books of 2022. She is a member of the board of directors of LitQuick, San Francisco's annual literary festival. In 2017 and again in 2023, Friends of the San Francisco Public Library honored Davis as a library laureate. Her work has also been published in San Francisco Chronicle and the Writer's Digest. She splits her time between San Francisco and Sun Valley, Idaho. Please welcome Evette Davis. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I thought I would start before I read from my books and maybe just tell people a little bit about myself. I live in San Francisco, but I also spend a lot of time in the Wood River Valley. I came here almost 30 years ago with my husband, and our family has more and more made this a part of our home, so much so that I decided to include this area in my writing. And 48 States actually features a heroine from Hailey. Her mom is a Hailey librarian, and I don't want to give away the plot, but she does in fact help save the United States from a terrible situation. So I hope, I understand one copy is checked out right now from the library, but I hope everybody will go and pay the library a visit. I was speaking with my librarian friends. I understand Hailey Library has a wonderful telehealth program. I hope everybody will visit the public library's website and learn more about how they can take care of themselves remotely. It's such a great way to be able to use a free service like the library. So with that, I thought maybe I would start by just reading a little bit from The Others. So The Others is the first book in a trilogy. The first book came out in September. Second book is going to come out in April, and the third book is going to come out in September. So it's a very fast-paced schedule, but I think people like and expect to read books on a kind of more rapid schedule. And it's about a secret society of supernatural beings who interfere in politics and elections to save humanity, which is sort of appropriate to talk about the few days after Election Day. So I thought I would read a few passages from The Others, and then I thought afterwards I would read a little bit from 48 States since it's so close to home. And if there's anybody out there in the internet with a question, maybe you can email or text in, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. So I thought we would get started. Most of you are probably familiar with the fact that San Francisco is a foggy city. What few people know is the real reason for the fog. San Francisco's weather, despite what the nightly news may say, is controlled by a powerful spell. This spell conjures up the cool, wet fog to keep people from seeing what is really going on. The fog tumbles across the hills and mountains like a great gray-white wave, pressing inward until it erases San Francisco from view. On the most foggy days and nights, people can barely see more than the hand in front of their face, and it can be difficult to know if what you are seeing is real. That's when the city's others, fairies, witches, vampires, and werewolves can meet. They attend to their business in the darkness of night, the light muted, the air damp and gray. The others leave behind no trace of themselves or their activities. The fog is their eraser, a privacy screen to shield humans from an unsettling truth. They are not alone in this world, and they are not in control. Chapter 1. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a child of time walkers who visited her village in Scotland. In her tales, they brought news of dead loved ones and warned of impending dangers. Free to move between the past and future, these witches were welcomed cautiously by the villagers and warmly by women like my grandmother who had their own gifts. I always thought the stories were charming folklore, the stuff packed into books in the library. Then, quite unexpectedly, I woke up one day and discovered that the legends might hold some truth. It was early August as I came into consciousness on my kitchen floor, my head thudding from a terrible hangover. The first thing I realized is that I'd been plagued by the dream again. The sleek black panther with the green eyes always walked near me, yet never blocked my way. The creature always stayed close, as if it wanted to communicate. As I woke up more fully, blinking in the light, I began to move my cold limbs gingerly. Why had I failed to make it into bed? Slowly, I remembered the details of the previous night and the previous week. Losing a client to my competitor, picking a fight with my best friend, skipping work, going on a drinking binge. I opened one eye, steeling myself to stand up when I heard the voice. "Let me help you," a woman's voice said. "Lily?" I asked aloud. Maybe I had let my best friend in last night, or maybe I had called her and she had used a key. "It's not Lily." "Get up, Olivia." I did as I was told and promptly let out a scream as I staggered up and spotted a strange woman standing on the other side of the kitchen. It was someone I'd never seen before. "Who are you and how did you get into my house?" I asked, wondering if I'd managed to leave the door open. Maybe some deranged person had walked in off the street. I did live in a city after all. I began calculating how quickly I could get to the phone to call the police. But then I looked more closely. I saw that she didn't look deranged. She seemed about my age and was tall, slightly more so than Lily. She had long black hair, but it seemed almost darker than black, like the color of a raven's wing, or say, maybe a panther. She was wearing skin-tight leather pants and a dark sweater. The fingers on her hands were long and slender and adorned with several silver rings. She wore a small silver hoop in one of her eyebrows, which framed green eyes that glowed like a cat. I was beginning to see a pattern that unnerved me. "Are you the panther?" I asked, shocked at the absurdity of my question. The woman nodded. "You did invite me here, Olivia. You asked me to come and tell you what I had to say." Too stunned for words, I began to question whether I was losing my mind. I worried that my artistic substance abuse using mother would be the one to go off the deep end, but now maybe I had it backward. "This is your problem, Olivia. I've been watching you for several weeks, and you haven't lifted a finger to help yourself. So here I am. At last, we meet face to face." The woman offered me her hand. I grabbed it. It felt warm, like the flesh of a human being. "How is this possible? Are you here? I'm not hallucinating." "I'm real," she said, "as real as Stoner Halbert, only I have come to help you." "How do you know about him? How do you know about me?" "Your grandmother sent me. Bella chose me to watch over you when you were born. When you ran into trouble with Stoner, I expected you to summon me, but it seems you don't practice the old ways of your family. I've been forced to appear in your dreams to get your attention." "Summon you?" "I have no idea how to do that," I said, my tongue swollen in my mouth. "I had no idea my grandmother could do that sort of thing. I was drunk and angry last night. If I did have an outburst, well, I had no idea that it would result in, that it would bring you here." The woman laughed. "There is a lot about this world you don't know, Olivia, and that has put you in harm's way." I walked slowly to a stool and sat down. It was too much. My head was pounding. I was exhausted. I decided to make an espresso and see what would happen next. Perhaps it was the combination of fear and a raging hangover, but keeping up light banter felt difficult. "Why are you here again? What were you trying to tell me when you appeared in my dreams?" Elsa put down her mug of coffee and faced me. "I came because your grandmother feared what would happen if you continued to block your gift. Before her death, she summoned me and told me she had seen a vision in which you were in danger. She asked me to visit you periodically and to ensure you remained unharmed. For many months I watched and saw nothing. And now you're in danger. It may have seemed wise to avoid using your powers, Olivia, but turning off your instincts has made you vulnerable. You're not even trying to sense when you're in danger. It's why Stoner Halbert's demon picked you. This remark caused me to drop my coffee mug on the marble table, where it promptly broke into several pieces. Why should I believe this is real, or that what you're saying is true, I asked. To cover my feelings, I leaned down to clean up my mess. Either I was having a complete mental breakdown, or there was a spirit guide in my kitchen discussing a demon. So Olivia is drawn into reclaiming her powers, and then she's introduced to a mysterious man who brings her into this organization called the Council, and they explain that they work in politics and try to work on certain elections to sort of help try to keep the temperature down. And that is a certain part of the book, but the book is also really about a woman coming to find her power, learning about how she can be strong and use her authority and get used to it. And along the way, she, falls in love. She meets a almost 200-year-old vampire who sort of helps draw her out of her shell. And the two of them have a strong attraction to each other, but they have a hard time meeting up. But they finally run into each other again at a public concert in Golden Gate Park, and I think was sort of a cute moment between them, and I thought I would read a little bit about their romance. So she's gone to a public festival, and the band has come on, and she's met him once before, but as soon as they were done talking, he disappeared, so she wasn't able to really get in touch. And now she sees this man appear on stage. He was pale, amazingly so, with a slight sprinkling of freckles across the middle of his face and fiery red hair that hung straight to his shoulders. Before he began to play, he pulled a hairband out of his pocket and tied his hair into a ponytail. This made it easier to see a small hoop earring in his left ear, and to see his eyes, which were a green similar to the moss on a shady side of a log. He had a long, narrow nose that sat above a set of pale pink lips. He was tall and slim in a way that appealed to me, as I have never been one for bulky, muscular men. Okay, I'll admit it, I was intrigued. But I couldn't say why he caught my attention. In San Francisco, there is no shortage of tall, gaunt, waifish men to gawk at. I noticed he also had a fabulous set of tattoos around his wrists and elbows, again, not a rare occurrence. With him, though, there was a certain je ne sais quoi. Maybe it was his gray shirt and faded jeans. Maybe it was the way his gray shirt and faded jeans hung on his body. I was trying to put my finger on what it was that caught my attention when the trio began to play. And the moment I heard the music, I knew he was the vampire from the tunnel. The recognition was immediate. When I looked back at the stage, his green eyes were gazing directly into mine, and he had a slight smile on his face, as if he was also satisfied to find me. I held his gaze, sank back in my chair, eyes locked on him as he moved his fingers up and down the neck of the guitar, fret to fret to fret, hitting every note while never taking his eyes from mine. I never put much stock in love at first sight, but honestly, I was dazzled by the gorgeous musician making eyes at me. He periodically switched instruments, using a banjo instead of a guitar, and now and then I would look away to chat with someone or take in the crowd, but the moment I turned my head back, he would meet my gaze. I was enjoying myself, but I realized I needed to bring our staring contest to an end and leave before this vampire got the idea I was actually interested in getting to know him better. It's been well established by me that I don't have boyfriends. I sleep with men occasionally, usually the kind of men who don't want to be called again, and this suits me fine. I'm not interested in dating. I don't believe that people fall in love and live happily ever after. Of course, this vampire never said he wanted to date me. I had no evidence that he wanted anything to do with me. Last time we were alone, he abruptly stopped talking and disappeared. In fact, I didn't even know if vampires liked humans, let alone dated them. But the biggest black mark against him, he was already dead, which meant he had a lot of free time on his hands. To me, this was a fatal flaw. The last thing I needed was a guy with too much time on his hands hanging around. Having had this entire conversation quickly in my head, I reluctantly packed up and abruptly set off as the band was ending its set. "I see you can't finish what you start," he said, his southern drawl sounding stronger today. Whoa, vampires are fast and quiet. I didn't even hear him come up behind me. I turned to face him, prepared to indignantly deny all, when I found myself looking into eyes far darker than they had seemed from the stage. I exhaled before I could stop myself. My God, he was beautiful. He was giving off the calmest waves of energy I had ever felt. I, however, did not feel calm. I was feeling anxious. How exactly had he found me so quickly? "Have we met?" I asked in my haughtiest voice. He threw his head back and laughed. "You spent my entire set ogling me, and now you're going to pretend we don't know each other? That is downright cruel." "I was not ogling," I said. "I was watching you play. I happen to like bluegrass music." "Liar," was his reply. We were at a standstill as I stood watching him, trying to control my breathing. It occurred to me that he was standing in the midday sun. "Are you going to burst into flames if we stay here?" I asked, genuinely not wanting to draw that kind of attention to myself. I mean, how would you explain that to the police? "No, I will not burst into flames, but I would like to get my hat and my guitar and find some shade." So the two of them leave and they go and they take a walk further into Golden Gate Park. By now it was late afternoon and the clouds were moving in. The light around the lake was slightly dulled and the sun had to push through the clouds to be seen. It was beautiful, and I was pleased to see a flock of geese flying across the lake, honking as they came overhead. I led William into the inner ring of the lake, where a dirt path climbs to the top of what locals call Strawberry Hill. He walked wordlessly next to me. When we got to the top, I gestured to show him the panoramic view of the city, and he smiled. "Are you really a vampire?" I asked, wanting to firm up my assessment. He turned and looked at me and asked, "Are you really a human who can size people up for what they truly are?" "I am," I said, pleased with his explanation for my gifts. "I'm glad that we got that all sorted out. Now, what do you mean you've been having bad luck? In my experience, there's no such thing. There's bad information, bad planning, or bad execution. If you've had one of those three, then you usually have bad luck." I explained my circumstances and described Elsa, the Black Panther who came to me in my dreams. "I have a sort of ghost of my own. One morning after a night of heavy drinking, I woke to find her standing in my kitchen. It scared me, I won't deny it. It's not that I didn't believe in spirits. I never really gave it much thought. Now, of course, I know the earth is really divided into parallel worlds, but it was a shock to see an ancient time walker sitting in my home." I could see this story actually shocked William because he was looking at me now with what seemed like a new appreciation for my situation. "Did you tell her you were going for a walk alone in the woods with a vampire?" "I didn't know myself," I said, hoping this wasn't the end of my evening. "It's none of her business." I added, suddenly worried I would never see William again. William shook his head. "This is powerful magic that should not be interrupted." "I don't want to interrupt. I'm happy to learn what Elsa wants to teach me, but I don't want to be told what to do or who I can be friends with." William bent his head down and began to laugh. "My dear, sweet Olivia, you have a lot to learn about the world you've entered. Vampires don't make friends," he said. "They take lovers." And then he leaned in and kissed me until my lips felt like they would blister from the heat. I had no idea how powerful sexual energy could feel at that moment when I opened myself up to it. It was easy to understand now what someone meant by being lost in a kiss. In fact, I was so lost that it took me a few moments to realize I was actually no longer kissing him. At some point, he disappeared like he had the day in the tunnel. Once again, I was alone in the dusk light. This was the second time he had managed to vanish. I vowed there would not be a third. So that's a little glimpse of the others, which is just a tiny sliver into what's going on in this magical world. I hope people will pick up a copy and learn more. And I guess since we have a little bit of time, I'll just read a little bit about 48 States, which, as I said, stars a heroine who's from here. So I guess, a little bit of a setup is required. This book is set in 2040 when there has been a series of domestic terrorism incidents in the United States, and the United States has decided to create large fracking territories to avoid having to import foreign oil. And as a part of that, it is claimed states for its own, sort of using a version of eminent domain, and it has set off a mass domestic refugee problem, and now there are fracking territories and people can work in them. And River, who's an Army veteran in these wars in the Middle East, has taken a job in one of these fracking territories. River struggled to shut the bar's door against the howling wind. Winter was a bitch in the territory, but at least her heavy gear kept her warm. 20 pairs of eyes followed her as she entered the bar. She tracked the stares out of the corner of her eye as she walked towards an open seat, never acknowledging the scrutiny. She sighed with relief as she eased onto one of the bar stools. She must have traveled up and down the highway a dozen times in her rig tonight, with nothing but natural gas flares for company, up and back until her arms ached from dragging the hoses in and out of the holding tanks. She could feel her back stiffening up, but it was another night without an injury and more overtime pay in her bank account. A bar back placed a bowl of popcorn in front of her. The aroma transported her back to her childhood when jump ropes and sleepovers ruled the day. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. A delivery from the bartender brought her back to the present. This is for you, he said, placing a glass of what was likely tequila. Men always sent that, or Jägermeister, in front of her. Send it back, River said, pushing the drink away. Sure thing, he said. If I were you, I'd skip the drink and head out. Most of these guys just got back in town from their shifts. Thanks for the warning. I've had a long night myself, so please just bring me my usual. River watched Bobby walk away to make her drink. If she'd been looking for a lover, he would have been a good choice with his tight black t-shirts and full sleeves of ink. His right arm was a multicolored mix of peacocks with gleaming feathers, mermaids, and the rings of Saturn posted mid-bicep. An elaborately inked treasure map covered the other arm, but he never revealed what the prize was. A nose ring dangled from his septum, giving him a menacing air, but it was all an act. He'd come to nurse a broken heart. River wasn't sure of the particulars, only that he preferred being in the territory to San Francisco. She reminded him how crazy it was to leave California for such a rotten, dangerous place. He laughed. Anywhere can go rotten if you mess it up bad enough. She nodded, knowing only too well that he was right. You're being stubborn as usual, Bobby said as he returned with her rum and coke. I'm going to say it again. Most of these guys just got off their 20 and are here to party. She knew what he meant. Williston, North Dakota served as the main outpost for the territory. The state had been emptied by forced evacuation and then repopulated with a mix of workers, mostly veterans from the Caliphate War, working on rig crews in 20-day shifts or hitches. As soon as the shifts ended, the crews came back into town, ready to make up for lost time. If you wanted to have a drink and mind your own business, you patronized Outerlands. The other 10 or so bars catered to a mix of preferences and price points. With a 20-to-5 ratio of men to women, Bobby was reminding River to be careful. Women were usually meant for one thing inside the territory, and it wasn't for hauling. Still, she was always glad to see the neon sign for the Outerlands as she came around the bend in her rig on Highway 85, its gray concrete floors worn and pockmarked from years of use. The wood-paneled walls and lack of windows kept it dark, but the drinks were strong and the management favored music from the 1970s. She chose Outerlands because she liked the name and because they held a trivia night once a month. A voracious reader, she was good at collecting random bits of information and usually managed to win a few rounds. "I can handle myself," River said. "Maybe, but I feel compelled to ask you for what must be the 100th time, why don't you get the hell out of here already?" "And leave all this behind," River mocked. "Compared to being stationed in France, this is paradise." For nearly 2 years, she'd managed to avoid telling him the truth, that her husband had killed himself and left her with a mound of debt and few options except to leave her daughter and work in this godforsaken wasteland. That at $80 an hour, more than 100 if she worked overtime, she'd sign the contract to drive a haul truck inside the territory as soon as they'd offered her the position. "You know you don't belong here with all these heathens," Bobby said. "Heathens," River replied. "Your Berkeley roots are showing." "Are you referring to their lack of godliness or just a general barbarous nature?" "Both. And for the record, it was Berkeley undergrad. I studied creative writing at University of San Francisco until my scholarship ran out." "Here's to words and their meanings," River said, remembering that day her mother, a librarian, was outraged that the government ordered books it considered subversive to be pulled from the shelves. Suddenly, River sensed someone standing behind her. The stench of body odor and solvents invaded her space, and she leaned in, as he leaned in to speak to her. "What's the matter? Don't you like my gift? Maybe I should have sent you what I'm having. Bartender, bring over another drink." "No thanks," River said, wanting nothing to do with the bourbon cocktail he was pushing. "I'm not drinking." "That's a bunch of baloney," he said, cutting her off. "I see your glass right there." "You didn't let me finish," River said. "I was about to say I'm not drinking with other people." "Well, that's too bad, because I've decided you and I are going to have ourselves a little party tonight." "That's not going to happen," River said, keeping her gaze straight ahead. "Oh, come on," he said. "I can be a lot of fun." "Actually, I was just leaving." "Well, we can walk out together then," he said. "Are we clear?" The majority of the bar patrons, never candidates for charm school to begin with, sensed the promise of violence and turned to watch. Her unwanted visitor grinned, egged on by the spectators. "I promised to be nice," he said, grabbing River's newly cropped hair. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. I don't want to have to hurt you." River nodded as she rose from the bar stool. She stomped on his foot, grabbed his other hand, and brought his arm in close, using it as a fulcrum to send him tumbling. The man let out a whimper as his bones snapped. He landed flat on his back with a thud. River snatched her Glock from the back of her jeans and pointed it straight at his chest. "If you so much as raise a finger, I will put a bullet through your heart," River said. "Are we clear?" Her attacker nodded, but otherwise remained motionless. "Good," she said, "because I don't want to have to hurt you." River turned back to the bar, grabbed her glass, and finished her drink. "I'll pay you next time," she said, heading out the door. She kept her gun out and did not let her guard down until she was inside the cab of her truck. The snap of the man's forearm echoed in her head as she tried to catch her breath. 2 tours of duty in the Army, and she still hadn't grown comfortable with her ability to inflict pain. It didn't compute with the images she carried of herself. After her father's death and the poverty it brought, forced her to enlist after high school. Although it had been a welcome distraction from the ache of bitter disappointment, she carried a lingering sense of shame over how easily she had adapted to life in the Army, to the physical endurance, and eventually the feel of a gun in her hand. The preparation for war, the rehearsal to kill, the military's rhythms and customs, hierarchies, all of it brought a sense of organization that were comforting. But beyond the orderliness, it bore no resemblance to what she'd previously wanted or had known. River thought about switching bars as she drove home. She decided against it. If she saw the rig tech again, the semi-automatic would prove crucial. There would be no fumbling to reload, just a steady supply of bullets in the chamber. If he came for her again, she would end it. There was no penalty for killing a man inside the territory. For that, you would need laws, and the government had signed them all away. So I'm just going to read a little more, and then I think we can end this. I thought people might want to hear a little bit about the sort of central drama point of the story, and then I think we'll end for the night. It was midnight by the time River pulled her truck back out onto the road, the full moon illuminating the pavement in front of her. She felt giddy with victory, but also slightly embarrassed at how easy it had been to answer most of the trivia questions. Lucky for her, she remembered her high school book report about daylight savings being ended. The reunification of the two Koreas had been big news. You almost didn't have to be a trivia nerd to remember that day in 2025. The question about the only state not to legalize marijuana stumped her, never having been interested in the stuff, but someone on her team remembered it was Alabama. It was fun to win trivia night, but it was more fun to be in a room with other people who liked to use their brains. She missed that part of her life. It was rare to find avid readers inside the territory. Even the clerk of the post office seemed mystified by her. "You sure do get a lot of mail," the woman had said earlier in the day. "What's inside all these boxes?" "Books." "Books," the postmaster replied. "What do you need them for?" "I read them," River said. Her response always made the clerk giggle, like it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. As with the bartender, though, she never told her the truth, that the books were one of the few pleasures she allowed herself in the territory, that they were an escape from a brutal but boring existence and provided solace for a broken heart. Before River could pull herself out of her thoughts, a man appeared in the road several feet in front of her. She blinked a few times to clear her sight, worried that the two rum and cokes had caught up with her, but then the specter raised his arms over his head in surrender. River's brain reverted to combat mode as she slammed on the brakes, forcing her truck to the side of the road. She pulled her gun from beneath the driver's seat, her internal voice doing an assessment. "I have 17 bullets in a new magazine, and he is one man with no weapon showing." She watched the reaction of the man as she climbed out of her truck. He was definitely surprised to see a woman. As the seconds word passed, River scrutinized the figure in front of her, trying to get a sense of what she was dealing with. The stranger stood still, except for his chest, which rose and fell rapidly like a dog panting. In the light of the full moon, she noted a hint of red hair under a navy ski cap, and a pale face marked by nasty scrapes. His hands were a mess, chewed up and bloody, like he'd slid down a mountain on his fingers. Keep your hands up where I can see him," she said, her gun trained on him. "We don't get a lot of hitchhikers in this part of the world. Tell me what you're doing here." "I had an accident," the man said. "An accident?" River repeated. "I was kayaking on the Missouri River, collided with a boulder and got tossed out. I must have hit my head. When I woke up, I was miles downstream." River remained silent, her sixth sense telling her she was missing something. "Can I put my hands down?" the man asked. "I'm exhausted." "Nope, not yet. Tell me again how you got here." "I told you, I had an accident." "Kayaking at night near the territory?" River asked. "You're either stupid, crazy, or worse. You're one of those protesters looking for trouble. I'll tell you right now, trouble is not something I want any part of." She fished a small mag light out of her coat pocket and ran the beam across the stranger's frame. She went back and forth twice before she caught something she'd missed. "Did you also shoot yourself while you were kayaking?" River asked, eyeing what was clearly a bullet hole through the sleeve of his dry suit. "I know it looks bad, but I can explain." "I doubt that very much," she said. "Please, I need your help. One night, and then I'll be on my way. If you'll just let me sleep in your truck and get me the first aid kit, I'll patch myself up and I'll be out at dawn. If anyone asks, you can tell them you had no idea I was here." "You do know where you are?" she asked. "They'll shoot us both if they find out I've been harboring a fugitive, and it would be a totally legal kill." "I know it," the man said, looking River straight in the eye. "I'm wounded, it's winter, and freezing outside. I have no weapon or food, very few supplies, and I have no idea where I am. The truth is, you are my only chance for survival." River had a second to decide. At the moment, they were alone. It was possible a car or another tanker truck would appear on the highway, or maybe a drone would pass overhead. If they were discovered, she would have no choice but to turn him in. What she was contemplating was against the rules. She just told him so, didn't she? She didn't want trouble, but really, a tiny part of her did. Maybe she was overconfident from a night of winning, of being in her element, but she wanted to know more about the stranger standing before her. How did this man with ginger hair manage to trespass into the territory? She'd driven this stretch of road countless times and encountered nothing and gone home to more of the same. Maybe she could steal away a little time to learn his story, take a break from the monotony of her existence. One night, and then the mystery man would be gone, and if he tried anything, she would kill him without a second thought. Okay, one night, and then you are dust in the wind. Got it. I promise I won't be any trouble, the man said, just seconds before he passed out.
That was wonderful, Evette. Thank you so much. I love both of those readings.
Thank you very much.
I was curious if you talk a little bit about, I'm not really a science fiction fantasy. Well, I say that and then I think of several books that I read and I've enjoyed them a lot, but why, what was it about that genre that attracted you when you thought about writing a series of books?
Sure. Well, I am a huge science fiction fantasy fan, and I mean, it started when I was very young watching Star Trek, and when I was little, I used to ride my bike to the library, and I often would sit in front of the Stephen King books, which I was probably reading before I was old enough to really be reading them, but I've always liked that genre. I think it allows you to bend time and space in a way that you can play with tricky kinds of societal questions in a little bit of a less intrusive way. And so I've always just been attracted to that genre. I think that speculative fiction, and science fiction and fantasy, it runs the gambit from like, deep fantasy like Game of Thrones to more contemporary things like this. And so I tend to think there's a kind of a home for everybody in that genre.
Great, thank you. I think we've got another question back here.
I wanted to ask, are there any sci-fi or fantasy works that you believe directly influence the lore of the others?
Sure. I am really a big fan of The Discovery of Witches, among other stories, which is also a contemporary witch vampire romance. It's by Deborah Harkness, and it's actually a very popular TV show, but he's a geneticist, a vampire geneticist, and she's a scholar at Cambridge, and they end up meeting and they have a romance, but they also are sort of on the hunt for what I would call like the origin of the species for supernatural beings. I just love that concept. And also in plain daylight, in traditional settings, there's something very compelling about that. And then I've been hugely influenced by traditional female science fiction writers like Ursula Le Guin, the Earthsea trilogy. I've always been very drawn to her writing and her just really like future casting of, and I really think she was sort of the one who invented Harry Potter. I don't tell J.K. Rowling I said that, but her Earthsea trilogy involves a wizard who, through his hubris, opens a tear in the balance between dark and light. So, there are other books that for 48 States, like Stations 11, a lot of speculative fiction. I don't think it would surprise anyone to know I'm sort of a voracious reader in my spare time when I'm not writing.
What was your approach to world building for the others?
So I started The Others as a play, actually. I was thinking about women involved in political consulting and public affairs, and at the time when I started my company 25 years ago, very few women did the job. And there were times when it was a little frustrating because there seemed to be certain areas where women's opinions just weren't sort of taken seriously. And so I started daydreaming about a play in which a consultant who's kind of down on her luck looks out of the corner of her eye and she sees like an ancient female warrior who's kind of coaching her from the sidelines. And I tried writing that play and it did not work. And so I ended up thinking about a novel instead, and I had read A Discovery of Witches, and I live in San Francisco, and I find San Francisco to be a tremendously magical place on its own, its architecture, its fog, and so I don't know if it's a sufficient answer, but it just kind of came together in my head. And then I think, like all good writers, I started thinking about, well, what do people need to see in their minds to feel like they're a part of this shadowy world? And San Francisco kind of lends itself to it because we live in a part of the city that's very foggy, so I can spend hours wandering through Golden Gate Park, and my house is not far from there. One of the things about the others that's interesting is these vampires can walk in the sun and they drink Jack Daniels. And so I spent a lot of time reading about the lore of witches and vampires and trying to figure out how far I could push their role without taking them too far away from what I think readers want and expect. Because if you go too far, people are like, well, this doesn't feel realistic, even though it's fiction. So I kind of was looking at world building through the lens of a contemporary adventure, but also trying to get these characters to not be ancient Victorian vampires who wear like capes and top hats and sort of like what we do in the shadows, right? Which is kind of the counterpoint to that.
This is a question from my colleague who texted it to me.
Excellent.
When did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
Well, when I was very young. I started writing poetry and entering spelling bees when I was in elementary school. And when other kids were playing sports in the summer, I was at the library, reading books, and I won a lot of awards for reading contests. And I wrote all kinds of things. And I actually began my career as a newspaper journalist, and my husband, who's sitting in the front row here, he and I met in a newsroom in the Bay Area. And then I got into working in politics. I went to Washington, D.C., I worked for a member of Congress. I went back to journalism, and I found that I missed, and then I started a public relations firm. And so I found at some point that I missed writing. It was sort of like this essential thing had been removed. And so I began working on this play and books, and I've always been drawn to words and writing and reading. And now my child, unfortunately, has the same problem. She's an English major and with a minor in philosophy, so we're doomed to reproduce more writers. And my husband's a journalist and an editor. So my whole life, which I think is also why in my professional life, I support public libraries, because I am so grateful that there are buildings full of books and information and material that are available to anybody for free. It's such a blessing, and you wouldn't know you were missing it unless it was gone. And particularly in small, communities, you have such an excellent library system in the Wood River Valley. It's such a rarity, and it demonstrates how much people care, but they take such good care of it. But really important to me.
I have yet another question. Were there any characters or experiences that influenced or inspired the character of River? Because in that brief moment, she reminded me of Kate Beaton and her graphic novel Ducks.
Gosh, I don't know where River came from. I will tell you that when fracking first took off, we were subscribers to the National Geographic magazine, and there was a photo of a woman who had left her home in Montana and had gone to North Dakota to take a job because her family had been put out of work, I think, in the oil fields in Texas. And at the same time, I had been volunteering for Swords to Plowshares, which is a veterans organization in San Francisco, trying to find homes for homeless veterans. And so I was meeting a lot of women veterans. And I just started thinking about people who put their lives into service. And I think her character kind of came to me. What I really am interested in as a woman is how women derive their power and how they deal with their evolution. Women soldiers, women professionals. You have to be tender, and then you have to be tough, and all of these things that are expected of women that make it harder to kind of understand where you are. And so River became this kind of this hero for me. A small town girl who goes to the community school, thinks she's going to go to Yale, and then has to join the army because she needs to support her family. She marries a soldier, and things go downhill from there, and she ends up finding herself in the middle of this huge crisis. And she has to summon the courage to go forward, but she also has to learn to love herself. And there's an interesting passage at the end of the book, which maybe I'll read because it sounds like somebody might be interested, which talks a little bit about her journey. And I feel like everybody has to learn to do this, but there's something about women that I think this is a harder lesson for them. So I think I'll share this with you just because it might tickle this person who had this question. No, I'm not going to give any spoilers away because I really do hope people will read this book. River walked into the kitchen just as her mother was pulling a loaf of banana bread from the oven. Tired and hungry, the aroma made her mouth water. It had been a long day, her interviews with the FBI and an entire alphabet of other law enforcement and regulatory agencies' grueling business. She wasn't under investigation, but the last weeks of her life, from the moment she'd seen Finn on the road to now, were under a microscope, the authorities trying to understand just what the hell had happened. "That smells good," River said, rubbing the back of her neck. Her body was stiff from the hard metal chairs at the Hailey police station where they were conducting the conversations. She'd insisted on doing the meetings back in Idaho so she could be with Ava, and no one had objected. "How did it go?" her mother asked. "Okay," River replied. "They want to talk about everything, every little detail. Honestly, it all sounds made up, like a script for a movie, but I know it's not." "I think it's good to talk about it and get it out," her mother said. "You're a brave woman, River, and you've had to endure a lot." "I feel a but in there somewhere," River said. Her mother smiled. "But the worst is over. It's time to begin making plans. I understand from Elizabeth that Yale is willing to admit you in the fall." "Elizabeth, you say her name like she's an old friend," River said. "Mom, she's the President of the United States." "Maybe so, but she's Elizabeth to me," Ingrid said. "It doesn't change the fact that it's time to get on with your life." "And what are you going to do in Connecticut?" River asked. "Oh, I'm not going. You've got a full scholarship. I'm going to stay here and relax. I'm worn out. Raising a child is for the young." River opened her mouth to protest, but before she could reply, her mother spoke again. "I almost forgot. There's somebody here to see you." "Someone?" River asked. "Who?" "It's Finn," her mother said. "He arrived about 10 minutes before you." "Finn?" They'd been separated. As soon as she's exited the train, she'd been whisked off to the hospital. It'd been a month since the explosion, and River hadn't heard a peep from him. Not that she'd tried to call him. She'd already determined they were doomed the night before. "River," her mother said sternly, "you need to stop hiding in the past. Mark is dead. His ghost is gone. Why aren't you going out there? What's the point? He's the son of a president, and you're what? The daughter of a librarian and a FedEx driver? Are you ashamed of your family?" "No, but I didn't attend college." "True. You joined the army and served your country. You speak 3 languages. Do you believe that Finn thinks any less of you?" "No. It's just that..." River was unable to finish her sentence. "Ah, I see. This isn't about what he thinks. This is about what you think of yourself. Let it go. You can't change the past, but there is a bright future waiting for you. All you have to do is walk through that door." River crossed the room. "I'm scared," she whispered in her mother's ear. "What if I can't do this? What if I don't know how to be happy after all of these years? What if I am broken?" "Nonsense. You're not broken, just scuffed up a bit, and Lord knows you could use a decent haircut." River sniffled and laughed. "For people like us, being happy is not easy," her mother continued. "Who can blame us after your father and Mark? There's no denying that things were hard, but you will get used to the feeling, and more importantly, you deserve it. After everything you've done for me, for Ava, you deserve to be loved. It's what your father would have wanted. It's what I want. That man outside loves you. He wants to make a life with you." Being happy often seemed like a quaint artifact, a relic of a different time. River learned to prepare for the worst, and all that came to pass confirmed her fears. Combat, a loveless marriage, death. Along the way, she became impervious until him. Somehow he broke through, and since their parting, the void he'd left behind had become a deafening echo in her heart. What waited beyond the kitchen door felt like the greatest challenge in her life, And yet it also struck her as absurd. She had entered countless villages ahead of her platoon in war, but she couldn't face the man she loved. Okay, she said, giving her mom's hand a squeeze. I'll go.
What is your strategy for meeting deadlines?
Wow, it's funny. I have two right now. You know, my strategy, so I have a day job and then I have to work at night. So my strategy is to eat dinner and come upstairs and try to write for somewhere between 2 and 3 hours every night. There's really no substitute for that. You either do it or you don't. So I have to just be very disciplined. It's also very hard right now. I feel like going out for a hike every day, but I've actually been home because I'm proofing the advanced reader copy of the next book in this trilogy. So I've given, I don't downhill ski, but I've been here for mini ski vacations where I've worked at home while everyone skied. Occasionally I've taken my laptop to river run, so I always just work until I get my deadline done.
Could you talk a little bit about your editing process? And first of all, I guess, do you write on a computer? Do you write longhand?
I actually write longhand and then I transfer to computer and then I tend to work off of that once I'm done. But I like to, maybe it's a vestige of being a reporter and actually, pulling out a reporter's notebook out of my back pocket for many years, but I do have an editor, an external editor, aside from the editors that I work with at my publisher. So I usually write by hand, I make a first draft, I go through and fix that until I get what I call kind of a second decent draft, and then I give that to my editor, Cassandra, and then she does terrible things to it and sends it back to me. And then it goes into my publisher who will take it through, another round of editing. To get a first draft out, you have to sort of take your hands off the self-critic button and kind of let yourself just do it. And as I've gotten more and more novels under my belt, I've gotten better and more comfortable at just doing that, knowing that there will be a time when I can come back and fix the prose.
Could you talk a little bit too about how your writing style, you've written 6 books, how your writing style and just your way of thinking about writing and what the purpose to you is of writing during that arc of your career?
Sure. Well, gosh, I think economy is the kind of word that I think of. Over time, I've gotten so economic with my writing that I actually have to be prompted to go back and to put more meat on the bones. When you first start, it's like you're telling, you're not showing, and there's a lot of extra words. And then I got very disciplined, and my editors are like, I think I'd like to see more about that. I think I'd like to draw that out. I think I want you to, give that character a little bit more depth. So I think I've gotten more descriptive. I've gotten better at showing instead of telling, but I also have gotten just so ruthless and unsparing. And I also think it's a legacy of being a journalist. And I jokingly tell people that when I was in college many, many years ago in a galaxy far, far away, my journalism was always a little bit too featurey, and my creative writing was always a little bit too much of a news story for my professors. So I've had this problem, for a while. I will say, just for people who are thinking about being a writer, everybody needs an editor. Everybody, even if it's your friend or somebody else, you can't possibly write something good without somebody else's help. It's just really important. And I have a lot of beta readers, women who have been, friends and colleagues for many years who, send me back very unsparing criticism, and it's always so helpful because you want people to like your books.
I have a very short answer to this question, I'm sure. When does book 2 of The Others come out?
April 2025, and I think you'll be able to pre-order it, probably at the beginning of the year.
What was the most surprising thing you discovered while writing your books?
Wow. Well, I guess the characters surprise you. Because you sometimes have a set idea of what they're going to do or how they're going to react, and then they have a mind of their own. So that often surprises me because I see things happening or changing that I wouldn't necessarily have thought at the beginning. And then I guess, without tooting my horn too much, something that surprises me is just how sometimes I can make things work. I can really, I haven't picked up 48 States in a long time, and just reading it, there are parts of it are just very pretty. They're very pretty, they're very evocative, and so it surprises me that I can do that sometimes. I feel very fortunate that I can string those words together. And I was watching your expression, and I said, okay, people like how this sounds in their mind. So, sure.
What authors have influenced you?
Oh gosh,
I know you said Ursula Le Guin, but more.
Sure. Well, I mean, gosh, that's such a long list. Bram Stoker, Ursula Le Guin, Deborah Harkness, Stephen King, and then there are contemporary writers like Nora Roberts, who sometimes people are really surprised. But take a look at how many books on the New York Times bestseller list Nora Roberts has, and how engaging and how devoted her readers are. MFAs in literature are wonderful, and there's a role, but there's also something to be said for somebody who can just really lock you in and get you to enjoy a book. And I think I straddle the line of wanting to write very well, but also want my books to be approachable and to be really fun and thrilling. Who's the woman who wrote the Maisie Dobbs series? Jacqueline Winespear, who wrote these great books about this, again, strong woman who goes from being a below-the-stairs maid to a fabulous detective. I really like Carl Hyacin, who's a political writer. I love his satire. The woman who wrote is it the Third Extinction, the Ninth Extinction? There's a bunch of is it Welch? No, who wrote Salt and Gulp, and there's a ton of books out there. And I read so much, and I'm so voracious that sometimes I can't even remember all the authors of the books that I read. Alan Furst, who is a masterful World War II spy thriller writer, just fabulous. Cara Black, who writes French murder mysteries. I mean, and in general, I'll read anything, even if it's not great. I think anybody who can finish a book, and a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to write that novel, and they never do it. And so anybody who even finishes something and publishes something, to me, I like to give them a lot of credit. And I have a strange weakness and fantasy for historic romances set in the Victorian era. They always have to have really good heroines, but there's just something about putting women in roles of leadership and letting them have adventures that I always find very satisfying.
Great. I think we have one more question.
How did you go about getting published? Did you have a game plan you set out for, or did you just, what was the story to getting published?
Sure, it's a great question. I tried to go through the traditional agent query letter process many times and didn't have any success, so I decided to found my own printing imprint, Flesh and Bone, which I hope one day to actually use to publish other voices in science fiction, poetry, whatever. And then 48 States, I actually had a writer friend, Kelly Armstrong, who said her agent was looking for something. Would I be interested in approaching her? And I did, and she asked for this manuscript. So I finished it, and I gave it to her, and she didn't want it. In the end, she thought that it was too political and controversial. So I sent it out to about 25 or 30 other authors, and I would say more than 10 took it and read it, but nobody ever wanted to publish it because my writing tends to be a little bit political. So I ended up self-publishing this, and then I ran into an old friend who is the owner of a hybrid publishing house called She Writes Press and Spark Press. And hybrid publishing is a sort of a great marriage of indie publishing, but also traditional publishing, in that you do help cover the cost of the book, but Simon & Schuster is our distributor. We have a normal sales team. We go into every book and every library, bookstore and library. So I like hybrid publishing. And of course, I would love to have an agent, and maybe one day I have a romance novel series set in Sun Valley. Maybe I'll try it again, but the world is changing for publishing. A lot of people publish on Substack. People are, traditional writers are doing both, and so I really like the hybrid model. I think it forces you to be a professional writer and understand the business and the industry, but yet you also have a kind of an indie sort of feel to it. So I'm open to pretty much anything, though, because I think that multiple platforms are kind of the future for writers.
Well, thank you so
Thank you.
much. That was just fascinating, lovely, lovely books, lovely. I'm standing over here, so we
Right.
won't get any feedback, but thank you very much for your time, and really enjoy your reading, and the questions were great.
Yes.
So thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see you next time.